Welcome to G-Man Gaming and Reviews. Today's video is going to be another reaction to a video called Developer Examines PirateSoftware Part 1 Job History and Development Hell. Now, I don't normally chime in on drama on YouTube, but because this is related to programming, I sort of do have some input on this one that I could give that might elaborate things for people who aren't actually familiar with the game development side or the stuff that's talked about in this video. So for those of you who don't know, actually it would be very interesting if you didn't know, a YouTube channel by the name of PirateSoftware has been getting a lot of flack for making, I suppose you could say, incorrect claims about a movement called Stop Killing Games, which is all about creating an initiative in Europe to it's not really a policy, but it's to create an initiative in Europe so that developers have to put in, especially for live service games, they have to put in an end of life plan that would when they design those games. Jason Hall, who is PirateSoftware, has taken a lot of criticism for his stance on the initiative. But what really has gotten him into hot water is the fact that he's sort of been exposed for making claims about himself that when people have investigated, it turns out he's really blown up his abilities as a game developer. Especially when people have examined his code. So this is from game developers, because he basically, when he came out and he was talking about his why he was against the initiative, he did the appeal to authority by saying that he's a game developer he routinely claims that he's been developing games. He's been a game developer for 20 years. He worked at Blizzard as a game developer, and it's sort of come to light that he's been padding his resume, so to speak. This video really goes into it, but and what was very interesting is when I first saw this video, I think it was 4 days ago, it had 20 subscribers. Then the next day I was actually going to do a reaction to it, because I was like, he's a smaller YouTuber. I'm a little bit bigger, so I might as well do it. But then the next day, he had 5,000 subscribers. Or I don't know if it's a he or she. I was pretty sure it's a he because of the voice. But he had 5,000 subscribers, and now he has 12.9 subscribers on incredible growth. But that's not the reason why I'm doing this video. I'm doing this video because I think because I've sort of dabbled with game development in the sense of learning, and because I have a background as I never actually worked, but I did almost finish a course in website development. I have finished a certificate for in Australia. So I have familiarity with a programming language called PHP, which is a derivative of C++, which is the language that is discussed in this video. C++ is a language that's often used in game development. So this video will go into it, but I'll sort of elaborate and add things to the video that the video I think this is a video for developers, so it assumes things that people would know, that if you're not a programmer, or if you don't have a programming background, or you've never dabbled in programming, you might not know. So there's some interesting things to add to this video. So without further ado, I will get into the reaction now.
Alright, so I'm sure many of you have heard of Jason Thor Hall, better known online as PirateSoftware, due to all the surrounding drama related to Stop Killing Games. This video isn't about the Stop Killing Games drama. I do support the Stop Killing Games initiative, and anyone in the EU currently watching this should go and sign up to care about game preservation. This video is going to be a review of Jason's job history, game dev industry claims, coding ability, and his Heartbound and Champion of Breakfast DRM solutions by me, a developer. I won't be touching on his hacking skills much in this video, since from what I found, all of his DEF CON wins were team efforts, and all of the stories related to hacking are just that, stories. Outside of his word, I generally can't find anything related to it. There isn't anything concrete or of substance in these stories for me to actually analyze and review. If anyone knows where he actually has hacking write-ups, or knows the VODs where he actually does something related to hacking, let me know and I can do a separate video going through and reviewing it. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start with Jason's LinkedIn job history. So, if we look at his LinkedIn, we can see his first recorded job experience is from 2002 to 2009, where he was a freelance security researcher and developer. In 2002, Jason would have been 15, and from what I found, he hasn't taken any program classes, so anything he knows at this point is largely self-taught. Another important thing is Jason actually had a job in 2004 that isn't listed here as a quality assurance intern at Blizzard.
I went to Blizzard in 2004, and this is kind of my whole career, right? My first job I got through nepotism, 100%. My dad worked at Blizzard for 23 years. He worked at Blizzard for 23 years, so I got a job there in 2004. I was shit. I was shit at this, and I realized I was shit.
Also, I think it's important that we talk about his dad for a second. Jason says his dad just worked at Blizzard, but that's grossly understating his dad's role and history at Blizzard. Jason's dad is Joey Ray Hall, and from a Reddit AMA his dad held, we can see the following. Joey Ray joined Silicon and Synapses in 1991. Now, you might be asking what's Silicon and Synapses, and what does this have to do with Blizzard in his post? Well, in 1991, Blizzard didn't exist yet. Silicon and Synapses was the original company name, and 1991 was the year it was founded. Joey Ray joined Blizzard before it was Blizzard, and when he joined, there were less than 10 people in total at the company. He wasn't some random Blizzard employee. He was one of the earliest hires at the company. Over his 23 years, he did all sorts of work, and was the one that founded the cinematic team, led the machinima team, the video and post-production team, and the esports live broadcast team, plus being responsible for all the video content for every BlizzCon between 2005 to 2014. Plus, he led the team that made the famous South Park World of Warcraft episode, and the inspiration for the He Who Has No Life character. Joey Ray was the director of cinematics at Blizzard. He wasn't some low-level employee that worked at the company. He was pretty high up in the chain. Anyways, back to Jason.
The next 5 years, I left Blizzard. I did not reapply, and I went.
I'm gonna chime in on this. I think this is gonna now. Normally, I don't comment on what people are thinking, but I think this sort of explains maybe why he feels the need to pad his resume, because it seems that his father was a big shot in Blizzard. And so that would sort of potentially make you feel that you have to sort of live up to that legacy, being in someone else's shadow. So I can sort of understand this is sort of a conjecture at this point, but I can sort of understand, when you've had a father who had such a pivotal role in Blizzard, like being in Blizzard even before the company started, it sort of explains, it sort of sets you up that you on on a pedestal that you sort of have to match up to your father. That would be a lot of pressure to have to live under, especially if you decided to become a game dev or something like that, because people are always going to compare you to your father.
And worked on my own. I did freelance. For everything. So I actually went into Second Life, which is a 3D Worlds game, if you've never played it before. They have a language in it called Linden Scripting Language, and I made games in there. I learned how to do 3D modeling. I learned how to do texture work. I learned how to do scripting. I learned how to engage with people that were playing my games. I learned how to do network model stuff. I learned how to do server-related stuff. I did this for 5 whole years.
So Jason's Second Life period of time is a huge rabbit hole, and there's 5 or 6 different controversies surrounding his time in Second Life. This video isn't about his controversies and allegations, so I'm going to skip over most of it. The only small parts we care about are related to coding. During his Second Life playing time, he played a character known as Moldavia's Fig Tree and started a company called Dark Sphere Creations. He claims he did game program with the Linden Scripting Language, the programming language of Second Life, and made some small games and some user-generated content for Second Life. While digging into this, I didn't find any proof he coded any games. What Dark Sphere Creations and his company was actually doing at the time was creating not safe for work adult furry avatars and selling them. Basically, his friend Wingless Emote, another Second Life player, would do the art and modeling for the furry avatars, and Jason would do some coding on top. What kind of coding he did on top of these avatars isn't exactly clear. Then they would sell the avatars, and eventually the business was making somewhere around $10,000 a month, primarily due to selling these avatars. There's some other controversy where it alludes to Jason trying to do dev work on Linden Labs projects and other game worlds, but I can't find any solid proof, just random posts and accusations. So in summary, there doesn't seem to be any proof he did any kind of game development or hacking during this period of time. Let's get back to Jason.
Then I came back to Blizzard in 2009, and I applied, not having his help in any way. I got the job.
Okay, the timeline here starts matching up with his LinkedIn.
All right, so they're going to talk about this, but you can't say that you didn't have any help at all. I mean, it's not like they're going to forget who your dad is, but anyway.
After his little detour with Darksphere Creations and working for himself, Jason now has an actual full-time job at Blizzard in 2009. This is his first official full-time job at Blizzard, and he is once again a quality assurance analyst. Jason claims he got into the company on his own merits this time, but I find that a bit hard to believe at face value. In 2004, he said he was terrible at his QA role, and that's why he quit. I searched to see if he studied anything IT related in high school or in college, or during the time gap, and I found this from his subreddit. Jason did spend some time in college studying to be an entomologist with a specialization in ants. He dropped out of college without ever finishing his studies, and it doesn't seem like he ever took any IT related courses during this time here. During that 5-year gap between 2004 and 2009, the only experience he said in the clip from earlier was his Second Life programming, and well, that wasn't exactly quality assurance, or hacking, or game development work. Plus, while applying in 2009, on his resume he would probably have...
So I'm going to say that his job seemed to be quality assurance, which is fine, but that's not really development. There's quality assurance, not to be disrespectful, but that's not development, okay? Like, as somebody who, normally when it comes to, development companies, like, especially when I tried to get into web dev, they normally want you to have experience. It's very rare that you would get someone, unless they have an intern program, but it's very rare that you would get someone who has no degree whatsoever being put into a role where they're actually programming like a lead game, like a lead game at Blizzard, unless that person had already worked on other roles and they had some actual tangible proof that that person is a programmer. So it's very, you see that you've seen this happen before where people who work on mods, if the mod's really good, they'll end up getting hired by the main company. But normally, unless, and based on what it appears that he was doing, I don't think that his programming in the Linden scripting language would have anything to do with programming games like StarCraft and World of Warcraft. So, quality assurance is not programming. You know what I mean? That's not really what you do as a programmer. You don't need to actually know, you don't really need to know how to do any programming as quality assurance, because I've looked into it before. You just need to actually test games by going through, by playing the game and looking for bugs in the UI and stuff like that. You know what I mean? As a quality assurance, it's not really your place to actually fix things. It's normally the developers that would actually fix things. So it doesn't really, it's not really the, it's really strange that he worked as a quality analyst for 3 years, but he never actually worked as a developer for Blizzard. You know what I mean? It's it's not quality assurance. Don't get me wrong. It's not to say that people who work quality assurance don't work and don't program, but it's not a requirement normally of quality assurance. It's normally it's just testing. So you're testing for bugs afterwards. You may have to go through the author of this video will mention this later, where you may have to go through exact tests, but that's, you don't look at video games. How many people fill in bug reports all the time that aren't programmers? I mean, I've filled in bug reports for games before. You don't need to be a programmer to do that.
Or Blizzard itself would have had a record he worked there previously as a QA. So that would make applying a second time for a similar position easier. His dad, once again, was a pretty high person in the company, and some people might remember Jason being Joey Ray's son from before. It's not impossible he got in on his own merits, just a bit hard to believe considering he doesn't have experience with any real program languages at this point, and he doesn't have any degrees or certificates. Okay, back to his LinkedIn and his job. So he held the role for 3 years and 2 months, and once again, this was his quality assurance role. One thing Jason often does is he claims all QA are developers. First, as someone that has worked QA myself, this isn't true. I'm not saying QA aren't important, but the majority of QA generally are non-technical and only a small portion are. And most of...
Now, to talk about this, right, it's not a bad thing that QAs aren't technical, because that's kind of the point. So, to give you an analogy in web dev, right? So I have worked as a, well, not worked, but I have designed websites for people before, right? And one of the things that I designed I built up. So when you talk about building sites in WordPress, you don't actually have to code for that. But I have actually designed websites from scratch before for my assignments, right? So I had to build a website from scratch in PHP, MySQL. MySQL is a database. So normally with websites, you've got what's called dynamic websites, where you've got the structure of the website, which is the HTML coding language, and then you have the data on the back end. And not what happens with dynamic websites is, when it needs to load that information, it has the template of the website there. So it grabs the information from the database and puts it on the page and then spits it out to you. That's a simplistic way of talking about it. But the point is, as somebody who has designed websites for people, when I've had them go through my websites, I've had them request changes to things because they said it was confusing. Like, for instance, to give you a specific example, when I built a WordPress website for a friend, the WordPress website had a contact form. And in the contact form, it had like this message box. And underneath it, it had something it was talking about like how to put something in the message box. And my friend goes, "That's really confusing. Can you get rid of that?" And at first I was like, no, that needs to be there. But then later on, I thought about it, and he was right? It was confusing to have that box underneath the message box, and it didn't need to be there. So the point is, the fact that QA can't code is actually a good thing, because it means they're looking at the program, or they're looking at the game from the mindset of someone who's not a developer, which is kind of the point of quality assurance. You don't want your game to go to market with bugs that QA didn't pick up. That's the whole point. You're skipping the process. You're skipping the whole process of having a developer. So basically, you really want to avoid the consumer picking up on the bug. So that's the purpose of QA. So it's not a bad thing that QA can't code, right? It's sort of like in the job description. It obviously, if you can code, I mean, it helps you in other things, but it's not a bad thing. Right? But to be honest, to say that, to use QA development, working as a QA analyst as sort of a citation that this person is a developer, would be like saying that, somebody who's worked in the marketing field is also a developer. It's like, no, right? QA is a very specific. QA and marketing are very specific skill sets. You don't need to code, but also it's beneficial to have, like, even if you had a company, a game development company, I wouldn't want all my QA to be able to code, because I want them to look at the game in the same way that a consumer would. So it's not a bad thing to not be able to code, but it's not representative of development work.
The places I worked at, QA generally has no coding ability and are tasked with doing manual regression testing. Basically, they get a series of test cases they need to go through, and each test case has a written out set of instructions they just follow. If something doesn't match the case steps, then a bug is filed and actual developers are tasked with addressing it. So I personally wouldn't call his 3 years at this position game development experience. And if we look at the bullet points he has on his LinkedIn, besides one line, namely the design and create an automated system, there's nothing here that even remotely implies he was coding or doing any kind of development. I'm making this point since Jason often claims he was a game developer at Blizzard for 7 years, but his first 3.5 years didn't include any developer roles. Also, to address his "if QA didn't do their jobs, games wouldn't be released" argument, most games have music. If a musician doesn't complete the OST, a game can't be released. Does that mean they're now developers too? Just because you say something confidently in a deep voice doesn't make it true. Moving on to his next role, we have quality assurance hacks. Here he mentions he did some forensic analysis and detected threats. Also, something I'd like to note, all of his game projects listed here were coded using primarily the C++ programming language. This is a low-level programming language. This will be important a bit later in the video. As for the role, again, I wouldn't call this game development experience. This is more related to security work than game development itself. And from the...
This is not to be disrespectful, but like, this is a bit more on the web dev side. So, and sort of networking side rather than, it's helpful to know a little bit about the code, but most of the time the code's running in the back end. So this isn't really game dev.
The bullet points, it doesn't seem like Jason was doing much coding. His next role for 6 months was test engineer. My opinions are pretty much the same as the previous role he held. Moving on, we have the next role as security engineer for 11 months. This one is interesting. Since the bullet points here notes he managed web application security, for those that don't know what web applications are, it means he was working on websites and not games. There's no mention of programming here or what tools and languages he used. But regardless, this is without a doubt a non-game development role and doesn't have any overlap with game development.
Yeah, as somebody who has a background in web development, I'm gonna just point out and say this: that these two roles are completely different from each other. There are skills that you need as a web developer that you don't need for game dev, and like it, you know what I mean? It's like, so to give you a specific example, like if I go back to, so PHP is what you call a server-side programming language. So to specifically talk about website development, which is what's relevant to what's on the screen. So when you're talking about websites, you have HTML, which is hypertext markup language, which is pretty easy to learn. You've got cascading style sheets, which are like they tell you what the colors or the colors, fonts, that sort of thing would be. And they're pretty easy to learn, those two things. And then you have PHP, which is a server-side language. So PHP is it's almost a derivative of C++, but there are things that you have to learn about web development that you don't need to learn in game dev. So, for instance, in web dev, you would need to learn how to, like, especially since you're going to be using some sort of database, you would need to create I can't remember what it was called. There was a way of, I remember ODBC. So it was a language to allow the website to communicate with the database. But the point that I'm getting at here is that apart from, and I don't know what web application he was using. So there's lots of different web applications. Not all of them use PHP. I've seen web applications that use Python, and he's going to talk about this later on. But Python is a high-level language, and C++ is a low-level language. I'll talk about this in depth later on. But basically, what that means is, a high-level language is one that is closer to English, easier to learn, and more forgiving, right, of mistakes. So low-level languages like C++ and one other that I used to use back in the day, a long time ago, which was assembly language, where assembly language is one of the hardest languages to have learned. And even then, I was just a dabbler. I just knew just enough to be able to get a motor in the Atmel AVR to go in a certain direction, right? But that programming language was really complex. C++ is considerably harder than Python. So what you'll actually see later on is Jason has experience in Python, and this is not to be discriminatory to people who program in Python, but high-level languages like Python are generally easier to learn than low-level languages like C++. The reason has to do with, but there's also a reason why they tend to use low-level languages instead of high-level languages for like game development. It has to do with performance. So the higher level a language is, the slower runtime it's going to have. And if I recall correctly, it has to do with the fact that, so all computers, or at least most computers that you would have access to, they operate in zeros and ones. So binary, right? So anytime that you run a program, or in C++ or Python or anything on a computer, it has a compiler. And that compiler takes that language or that program and it converts it into the zeros and ones that a computer can understand. And that's the difference. So the thing is, the lower level a language is, the quicker it is to compile, but the harder it is to learn because it's less like English. Or it might have things that are not as intuitive. So I remember with assembly language, it had things about it that were not intuitive. In other words, once you understood or you had a familiarity with as to how that programming language did a certain thing, like setting variables, then it would be like, so setting a variable is just assigning a number or a true or false value to a particular variable, right? So it had weird ways of assigning variables and comparing variables. So that's the difference. That's sort of like a high. I'm using the term high level, but it's sort of like an overview of why it is important as to the difference between high level languages and low level languages.
Okay, next up, he moves to another security engineer role for 3 months. Again, same opinions as his last job. Now, his last role at Blizzard was a red team member. Red team is a common IT term that just means someone inside the company that attempts to hack into their systems, either digital or physical. So Red Hats basically try to make hacks and show how they got access. So these vulnerabilities and issues can be addressed before real hackers can abuse them. Now, while Red Hat is offensive security and hacking, it doesn't always mean you're programming like you see with those green terminals and pics. If we look at the bullet points Jason has listed, we can see he did exploiting physical access controls and social engineering operations. Social engineering is actually one of the most common ways hackers gain access to systems, and it doesn't have to involve any...
Yeah, basically this is just like phishing. It could be calling somebody, trying to trick them into giving you their details, sending them an email. He's going to talk about, but it's a non-technical role. You don't need to know anything about tech to do social engineering.
Programming at all. Social engineering attacks are something like the following situation. Let's say Jason in this example is a social engineer and his target is a fellow Blizzard employee with access to the game's servers.
I love the picture, by the way, of Jason. What a picture.
He could call them or email them from a legitimate Blizzard phone number or email and say he needs their account credentials. Normally, you would never share live in production account credentials, even if someone from your own company. But let's say Jason manages to convince the employee to hand the credentials over. Now Jason has a way to log into the system he shouldn't have access to. This is a social engineering attack. It's not technical hacking like most people think of. It's generally just being convincing enough and getting employees to hand over info or access they shouldn't be giving out. All right.
That's a very interesting skill for someone who seems to have made a career of padding his resume to have. Like being able to do social engineering. Basically, it's like being a con artist, right? Tricking people into, it's basically being a professional con artist. That's what Red Team is. Like when he's talking about social engineering operations, right? Very interesting that a person who has padded their resume worked as a professional con artist for Blizzard. That one is very interesting.
With all of that, and with all those jobs, we have 6 years and 6 months at Blizzard full-time for Jason. And if we include his time as a QA intern in 2004, we basically have his 7 years of experience at Blizzard accounted for. Judging by everything he has written here, it seems as though he's never held an actual game developer position.
Yeah, none of these is development. You know what I mean? You would have lead developer, game developer, junior developer, something like that. Like, this isn't to say that he doesn't have some IT background or some IT skills, but not what you would expect of a high-end developer.
And he's never done any game development directly. All of his roles at Blizzard were either QA, website security, or social engineering, basically his hacking. It doesn't seem like he's ever touched C++, which is the industry standard language to use when doing game development. But before I finish my thoughts on this, let's check out one more job after Blizzard. After Blizzard, Jason worked at Amazon Games for 8 months as an automation engineer. Again, he wasn't a game developer here. He also didn't include much information under his bullet points. He did documentation of vulnerabilities and did some automation work with Python. This is the first officially recorded line that actually shows he did some programming. Python is what we call a high-level language, meaning the language is designed to be easy for humans to read and understand as well as to write. Python is a wonderful language, and I'm not throwing any shade at it, but Python is not a language used to create games.
Yeah, like I was saying before, look, not to throw like the person said, not to throw shade, but there are things that Python is good at. Right? I've seen NASA use it. So like I said, it's useful for like what they're saying in here, data analysis, sciences, maths, repetitive tasks, but you don't see it used in games. Simply put, because like I said, it's a slower language to compile, which means, and you got to remember is how many lines of code a game is, right? To do all these systems, right? So You know what I mean? So it's one thing to have a small program that does data analysis, right? And to run that. But to try to create a game which is like how many, I don't know, millions lines of code, right? And, you know, remember, you're going to have like, you know, the more that that has to be compiled, and the longer that it takes to compile individually, the slower the program's going to run. So this is the reason why, as you can see, as what was it? I forgot the name. Slop News said, it's not used in games, right? It's all high performance computing because it just doesn't run fast enough in order to. Because you got to remember, with a game, you've got all these systems happening at the same time. So it's just not very. This is the reason why in game development specifically, you often see low-level languages, specifically for this reason, because it's just not that it's not as fast to compile because of how far away it is from, or how much longer. Like I said before, the lower level a language is, the more cryptic it is. Because it's closer to, not closer, but it's sort of like easier, it's sort of like quicker to compile for a computer than a high-level language is.
Technically, yes, you can code games in Python. Big drawback is it's an incredibly slow language. This is why the industry standard language for game development is C++, a low-level language that allows for incredible performance. The trade-off is it's a significantly more difficult language to work with. The reason I went through his job history so far and his programming language list is because Jason often claims he's a 20-year veteran of the game dev industry, and he was a game developer at Blizzard for 7 years. And he uses these claims to make himself seem like an authority and expert on game development and game-related topics, namely stop killing games. But from the looks of it, and in my opinion, it doesn't seem to me he's ever worked as an actual game developer within the industry, and it doesn't seem like he's.
I think the important lesson for the day is the lesson of humility, right? There's nothing wrong with starting out learning something, okay? But the thing is that they're going to talk about this later in the video, but the thing is that there's nothing wrong with starting somewhere, right? Like when you start as a programmer, you're starting somewhere, you're going to make mistakes. You know, nobody starts out in programming being like a super coder. There's so many things to learn by trial and error but it's more important. I think the problem is that like, it's more important to approach this with humility, just so that if you do the appeal to authority, this is going to happen to you. This was going to happen to Jason at some point. Okay, like it was going to happen, right? It, like, you know, when you pad your resume, when you make bold claims, sooner or later, if those claims don't match up, somebody's going to notice. So this is a lesson for all of us in the lesson of humility, to just understand that, you know, it's one thing to pad your resume, but always be humble, because if you overextend in your, I suppose you could say, your opinion of yourself, you might get dragged down.
Ever done much program work in the industry either. I'm not throwing shade at any of the jobs listed here so far. I'm just trying to be absolutely clear that none of this, in my opinion, as someone that has worked on game engines and done game development, none of this counts as game development experience, with a lot of his roles having absolutely nothing to do with game development itself at all. To help make this clear, here's another example to help everyone understand. It's like someone working at a hospital and doing payroll work, but because they're at a hospital, they claim to be a qualified doctor. It doesn't make any sense. Jason is making a giant leap with his "I'm a game developer for 7 years at Blizzard" claims. Anyways, let's go back to his LinkedIn and see what's next. Here we have that he was a cybersecurity specialist at Eagle Research Group. Based on Jason's stories, this should be when and where he was technically working for the government. There isn't a whole lot of information here, and with most of the bullet points being extremely generic. Since he claims this was government-related work, I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume he has NDAs, or he might not be able to give any specifics related to his work here.
And then when I did that, I went to the United States Department of Energy, and I hacked power plants for the federal government.
Jason makes a lot of claims being a hacker, and has told a lot of stories, but I could never find anything to back up his hacking claims.
This is one that I'm gonna say, he did do programming in Python. I'm not really much of a hack. I don't barely know anything about hacking. The only thing that I know about hacking is when I went on the main website and just looked at the HTML. But that being said, he could be a script kiddie, which is somebody who they're not really hackers in the sense that they find scripts on the internet and then they run them, and that script will check for an exploit or something like that. It doesn't really require you to be a programmer per se, or like a full-on hacker. It's more just like, it's just like running a program on a computer. Like when you open up Word, you don't really know what's going on, but you could be trained. So it's like using Word. You don't understand how to create a program like Word, but you understand how to use Word. So, just because like he was doing hacking and stuff like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's an actual programmer. Or at least that he's enough of a programmer to be like a fully fledged hacker. Or we don't really know the extent of his hacking as well. Like, so when you say penetration testing, it's kind of a bit vague, because it doesn't really tell us what kind of penetration testing was he doing. Like, for instance, is he really familiar with with servers? And so he knows how to test for, what's the version of server is running, to whether it's a Windows server or Linux server, to check to see if there's any hacks that could be put in based on the version that it's running. It's kind of vague as to what he did. And the thing is that it would like, if he was like a fully fledged hacker, I don't know if the hacking community would come out, but you'd say that there was more proof. But it's kind of strange to me that, okay, if it was in isolation, like if he didn't claim to be a game developer, right? In isolation, maybe he did do that. Maybe he is an actual full-on hacker, right? But when you look at it in totality with his claims that he's a game developer, which is just, he doesn't have the evidence that he's a game developer at 7 years at Blizzard, which he wasn't, that's where it starts to throw sort of, puts his authority in hacking into question.
Claims. So far, the only thing I found was he did do some social engineering attacks at Blizzard. Now, some of you might know about his DEF CON stories and his Mr. Robot claims. I'll probably cover those in a separate video. The reason is all of his DEF CON wins were done in teams of 10 people, never solo. And for his other hacking claims, there's only stories to go off of. To keep this video from being too long and off topic, I'll save his hacking claims for its own thing. Okay, his next set of experience is at his own company, also named PirateSoftware. But before we touch on that, let's talk about his more recent job experience at Off-Brand Games first, since that's a smaller topic to cover. Off-Brand Games is a game publishing company founded by Ludwig and Jason. I'm not entirely sure if Jason is a co-founder or not. Jason claims he isn't, but most posts and Ludwig's posts talking about the company seem to imply he is. Whether or not he's a co-founder isn't too important. Jason's role at the company is director of strategy. From Jason's comments on the matter, he basically helps indie game developers negotiate contracts. Again, no direct game development work here. Also, fun fact, the very first game Off-Brand Games was co-publishing was Rivals of Ether 2. A game by the developer's own words was built this time around as a more live service game. Really makes you think why he might not want to stop killing games to.
So just in case people don't understand, who have tuned into my video but haven't actually watched this original video, or who are not familiar with the Stop Killing Games fiasco. So the reason that this is relevant is because Jason, who PirateSoftware, has been very critical of the Stop Killing Games movement, which would have not forced, but it would have set some initiative in place for the European Union, the government, to maybe start looking into an initiative or a policy towards making games sold in the EU have an end-of-life plan for live service games. The reason this is relevant is because this game, Rivals of Ether 2, is a live service game, but I'm not sure if the Stop Killing Games initiative would have affected this, because to my understanding, the Stop Killing Games initiative only affects games it doesn't retroactively affect games. So I don't even know if the Stop Killing Games initiative would actually have affected this. But it makes sense as to why Jason is so against it. Or PirateSoftware, PirateSoftware is so against it, especially if this is a live service game. So it's sort of like, it's a conflict of interest, right? Because if you're producing live service games, then obviously you don't want initiatives that are going to force you to put an end of life plan into place for the game, because you just have to now not spend more money, but you have to like plan towards it, and they probably just don't want to do it. So the problem is that this shows he's not an independent stand. He doesn't have an independent stand in his opposition to the Stop Killing initiative. He has a conflict of interest, which he probably should have disclosed before he took his stance.
Also, don't throw any hate at Rivals of Ether 2. They actually do have an end-of-life plan to keep the game playable and alive for the community after it ends. The same goes for the rest of the off-brand published games. Don't throw them any hate. Okay, we're going to take just one more detour before we get to the Pirate Software company. Let's check out Jason's GitHub and see if there's any code for us to review there. For those of you that don't know what GitHub is, it's basically the site where developers store their code bases and development teams can work together on a code base. In Jason's case, his code bases would be tied to his games. Okay, so here's Jason's GitHub account. And he has 0 public projects on his account and 0 activity for the year of 2025. Okay, the no public repos doesn't exactly prove anything, and you don't need to have public repos, but most active developers do have something at least. Also, let me point out, GitHub does have an option of having private repos, which are code bases not viewable by users not part of the team. But GitHub also has the option to show activity on private repos on your profile without leaking any private repo data. Again, this doesn't prove anything, but it's incredibly odd to see a self-proclaimed developer and hacker have 0 public code on his GitHub and 0 activity on his account. Let's try 2024, and there's nothing. Oh.
Yeah, I totally understand this one. I don't have a GitHub, but I think I do, just not a public one. Because I ended up installing the program when I was doing a game development course. My point is, for those of you who don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head. Hang on, let me just find it. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know what GitHub is, it's like, so I have the program installed on the other computer. It's basically you could actually use it to like store versions of your code, and you can also use it to collaborate. But a lot of developers tend to use it because it's a great way of storing versions. I mean, when I was doing the course on game development via Skillshare, I think it was, or LinkedIn Learning, I had to install GitHub, which is not on this computer, on the other computer, which has got the dual monitors but doesn't have 720p, so I don't record on it. But I don't know if it's public because I don't remember. But the point is that for someone who it kind of makes sense, because I mean, if you are a developer, you probably, especially if you are a developer, right? You probably would be using GitHub, especially not necessarily, but to promote yourself, right? Because if you're a developer, like for instance, if you're a web developer, right, you would have a website, right? And you would want your website to be as well designed as possible so that you can show people how good you are at web development, right? So the same thing I would say applies with GitHub. If you're a programmer, by having like stuff on GitHub, especially stuff that's open, people can see that you are a programmer. So while by itself it doesn't prove that that Jason Hall isn't a programmer, or at least that he's not a game developer, the fact that he's not using it at all is, especially for someone in that industry. Like for instance, I'm sort of going to be getting into indie game dev, so I don't know how long that's going to take because I'm doing it in my spare time. But if I was a game developer, if I was a programmer, I would want to, especially a game developer, I would want to have code up there, because you're going to get job offers coming in, right? You're going to get people interested in working with you. So it's a great way, especially because this is the GitHub for Pirate Software, not just Jason, right? So it would be a great way of promoting his company to people that may want to hire him or his company to make games for them. So it would be a great way of promoting yourself, especially for like an indie developer, right? So it is kind of strange that he doesn't have one.
Okay, 2023. Oh, I see some activity. And it's bug reports. He has made 4 bug reports and some feature requests, 0 coding to review for 2023. Okay, let's try 2022. All right, I see 2 green dots. And again, it's 2 bug reports, no code to check over. All right, 2021, I'm feeling lucky, and there's nothing. Okay, 2020, he's applying to be a part of the live coders list. All right, last year to check, 2019, and his only activity is he joined January 13, 2019. Man, that was disappointing. Over 7 years of having a GitHub account, he seems to have done 0 public coding, with a grand total of 6 bug reports. Again, this doesn't prove anything too much, but most professional developers and hackers generally have something on their accounts, even if it's just super minor stuff like their settings for their favorite text editor or application. Jason could have a separate personal account where he does all his work, but the entire thing is just incredibly strange and unusual. Just about every tech YouTuber and streamer has a GitHub account with some random projects scattered around. Anyways, finally with all those positions and GitHub stuff out of the way, let's finally get to PirateSoftware, the company, and Jason's actual game development start. Let's take a look at his game dev skills, his game dev execution. With all his bragging, I'm sure this is going to be an incredible story with no issues at all. Alright, so his first game his studio published was a game called Champions of Breakfast. This was a game roughly built in 8 months in the Game Maker engine. This was the first game that Jason claimed had the unpiratable DRM, where basically the game's Steam achievements acted as the save file. I'll touch on all these points again in just a bit, keep them in mind, while I move to his next and only other game, Heartbound. So Heartbound is the big game PirateSoftware is known for, and it has a crazy development history. So according to the wiki, Heartbound's first build was October 7th, 2015. Again, this game was also made in Game Maker. It's a 2D game that's mostly story driven with extreme similarities to Undertale, and is supposed to have 5 acts or chapters in total. A Kickstarter for the game was launched on February 24th, 2017.
Right, so if we go back here, right, we can see here that at this early stage of development, the game was bare bones. It had only 3 rooms with no music and no sprites. The build was not meant to be playable. It was meant as a proof of concept so Thor could learn the game engine. Okay, so basically what we can see here is that this is probably his first attempt at making a game, right? Probably, right? Right? So, that makes sense, as you will see later. Oh, I think it was in another video. You will see later on. So there's nothing wrong with being like with starting in game development. You know, I mean, I love indie games. I think indie games are the future of video game development. I play a lot of indie games, but there's nothing wrong with being a learner. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just when you portray yourself as a super game dev that where it becomes a problem. If you just hadn't done that, I don't think you would have had. If you just hadn't done that, I don't think you would have had the problems that he had.
To Undertale, and is supposed to have 5 acts or chapters in total. A Kickstarter for the game was launched on February 24th, 2017, roughly a year and a half after work originally started on it. The original goal was to have the game finished and released by December 2017, but shortly after the launch, it was claimed the game was to be fully complete and released in early to mid 2018. A few months later, the goal was once again changed and now was targeting early access on Steam in December 2018. The game did land on Steam in December of 2018. In early access, this release contained a Chapter 1 that was complete, with a basically near fully done Chapter 2. Gee, I hope this doesn't become a trend with delays, failed promises, and shifts in goals. Surely Jason will complete this game in a few more years, right? At the very start of January 2019, they released a patch where in the patch notes it said Animus, the name of Chapter 3, was being developed, and this is where everything started truly going to hell. Now, we have a few things we should note here. This is technically the 3rd year of development if we're going off the October 2015 first build date. If we compare this to Undertale, Undertale completed development in 2 years, 7 months, with Toby Fox doing most of the development solo, with some help from Tammy Chang on art. Also, let's just take a quick look at the How Long to Beat site and see how much content Undertale has. Okay, the main story is 7 hours. With side content, it's roughly 11 hours. A completionist run is 20.5 hours. Okay, pretty good and respectable times for an indie game built in 2 years, 7 months. Heartbound, as of 2025, is still in active development. So let's take a look at how much content time they have. All right, the main story is 2.5 hours. With side content, it's 3 hours, and a completionist run is 3.5 hours. The PirateSoftware team has been working on this game for 10 years, currently more than 3 times as long as the Undertale team, and the PirateSoftware team has 1 additional team member. Yeah, just think about that for a moment. Anyways, let's start diving through 2019 and Chapter 3 Animus development. For most of 2019, it seems like there was steady progress on Chapter 3 with various patches over the year, so far saying additional content was added. On October 2019, 2019, Jason tweeted that roughly 86% of Chapter 3 has now been completed. Then 2 years later, Jason tweets that Chapter 3 is now 92% done. So over 2 years, he made 8% progress on one chapter. 20 years of game dev industry experience, people, and 7 years working at...
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I mean, this is what you would expect from someone who's just learning, right? Because, I mean, I understand, like, when you're doing your first project, as someone who started their first project a while ago, you're just going to encounter things that stop development completely. Like, you have to figure out how to do something, right? So this is the kind of thing that you would expect from someone who's a beginner, right, to the game development market, okay, to game development programming. It's not something that you would expect from someone who worked as a full game developer at Blizzard for 7 years.
Blizzard. Okay, let's rewind and go back to 2020 and see the Twitch statistics and see what was happening. Okay, the start of 2020 up till March seems like a normal stream schedule. Seems like he caught a cold on March 10th. Then after 9 days, he goes to urgent care and is diagnosed with pneumonia and gets a COVID test. Then we move to March 21st and COVID test results come back and it's negative. No COVID, just pneumonia. Wait, never mind. March 24th, Jason goes back to urgent care. Pneumonia was incorrectly diagnosed and he actually has severe bronchitis. Alright, March 30th, he's still sick, but once again confirms negative for COVID. This is really important. Alright, a few days later, April 10th, and his cold status is defeated and we're good to go. I know I'm being semi-joking in this section, but I generally don't wish Jason any health issues. Alright, so then we move on to April 11th, 2020, and work on Heartbound has restarted. Work is continuing over the next few days. According to tweets, most of April was good, so was most of May 2020. We're still working on Heartbound at this point. Again, nearly all of the May prog is on Heartbound. Then we skip all the way over to July 2020, and work on Heartbound is still progressing. Seemed like there's some trouble during September, October, and November, with December being fine, and so is January of 2021 being fine. Then we hit February 2021, and then he tweets out he has had COVID for 9 months since the start of February of 2020. Wait, what? Jason was only sick in March according to his own tweets at that time period. And there's work from February from earlier. And there's proof he worked during April, May, June, July, and August at the very least, judging by his Twitch stats and his Steam announcements and patches for the game. It seems the only major slowdown of streams and work was 3 months of September, October, and November. Where he lost 9 months of time and had to stop development based on his tweets, I have no idea. I mean, it's not like he's going to change his story after this, right? Oh wait, there's this old tweet from November 2020 where Jason says he was recovering for nearly 8 months and couldn't daily stream or work. Let's look at the Twitch stats graph again and his tweets. He couldn't work during this period, but everything he posts during this time says he was working on Heartbound, and his Twitch stats confirm it. So does Steam. I mean, Jason wouldn't lie and change his story and opinions randomly, right? Especially not to his loyal viewers and Heartbound fans. Let's skim the graphs and see what else we can see. Okay, 2021 minus the months of March, April, May, and June. His streaming is extremely good and consistent, with tons of stream days going past 10 hours and some days hitting 16 hours. 2020, about the same for March, April, May, and June, and September, with the rest of the months being slightly less consistent, but still more consistent than not. Then we get to 2023, and this is incredibly consistent with the stream averages being 6 to 8 hours per day. Let's start diving back into Jason's tweets. So on June 2023, he catches COVID again. Okay, that seems to match up with his Twitch stats graph. Here there's a clear week gone. Let's see what Jason says in July.
That was a hell of a thing. That's the second time I've gotten COVID. The first time took 9 months to recover. This one took probably about, I think it was in total about 20 days. So
there's no point in time in 2020, 2021, 2022, or 2023 where he lost 9 months consecutively or stopped development for that period of time. He also in the clip claimed he got COVID twice in total. So that doesn't explain why there's 4 sections of gaps on development, since all these gaps are months apart and he only had COVID twice. Let's skip ahead to June 2024 and see what he says about these 4 years of development.
How long have you been working in this game? Was the coding a solo job? Yeah. Nobody else has touched the code base for Heartbound ever except for me. It's just me. I've been working on it for about 7 years, but I lost 2.5 years to COVID.
Okay, I hope at this point you realize his excuses for not working on Heartbound and his tweets are filled with complete BS. Once again, he stopped development in 2000.
Yeah, I think he's sort of backed himself into a corner. Because PirateSoftware has this massive YouTube channel. He obviously got people interested in the game Heartbound. And obviously they bought it to support the channel, but not just that, because they're expecting that he's going to complete it. You know what I mean? And he now has to explain why it's taken this long. which is gonna blow up, actually, especially after a video like this or other videos. It's gonna just blow up in his face, unfortunately. You know what I mean? It's one, it's not gonna be good.
2020, 3 months between September to October, where he had his first COVID period of inactivity. His second COVID was in June 2023. No matter how you try to arrange this and make sense of it, the numbers don't work out. Especially since we can see his 2023, he basically had a perfect stream schedule. And if we look at 2021 and 2022, there were only 2 gaps where he seems to be affected, and they're months apart. Jason basically just decided to quit working on his game sometime during 2020 and has been making random excuses since then on why he hasn't made progress. Chapter 3 Animus, the reason we've been going through this chart started all the way back in January of 2019. If we look at the latest patch in 2025, work on Chapter 3 Animus is still going somehow. We have gone through 6 years of development so far, and Jason hasn't been able to complete 14% of Chapter 3. Seriously, what the hell? Remember, Undertale took 2 years, 7 months to finish the full entire game with 3 times as much content as what Heartbound is currently delivering in 2025, with 10 years of development time under its belt. To put this into even more perspective, let's look at Yandere Dev, a developer notorious for having no clue what he's doing programming-wise, and spends the majority of his day responding to emails and maybe spending a few minutes each day working on his game. He makes more progress and more consistently than Jason does. Seriously, I'm not joking. Here's the updated list for Yandere Dev starting in 2020. Yandere Dev has made more progress and more consistently in that year alone than Jason has in the last 5. We just might be living in a timeline where Yandere Dev finishes his game before Jason does. And yes, I might have gone slightly crazy trying to plot 6 years of Animus development with conflicting tweets and time gaps on the Twitch stats graph.
When you think of medieval games, you probably think of
yeah, so I thought that was an interesting video. There's plenty of other videos that have let's go back for a second. There are plenty of other videos.
So I'm sure many of you have.
Let's be honest, if you're a PC gamer, you
Alright, so I'm sure many of you have.
Okay. Oh, God.
Let's be honest, if you're...
I guess that's for the
so
clips.
I'm sure many of you...
Yeah, so this was my... Should have looked at it in the B-reel. I didn't do that on purpose. Alright, so, yeah, this was... I don't normally involve myself in drama, but I thought I had something interesting to say about this one, especially because of my understanding of high-level and low-level languages. It might not be a super big thing, but it's probably... A concept for non-programmers, and to sort of understand like why his claims are a little bit weird, why it's strange that why it's strange that like someone who's had 7 years of game development is struggling to create the game Heartbound. It would, like I said, it sounds to me like instead of being having like 20 years in the of being a game developer for 7 years at Blizzard, that he was aspiring to be a game developer, and then he never really got the chance to do it at Blizzard, so he moved on and did his own, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And he's following his dream of making indie games, and kudos to him for being able to get a company up and running and working on his dream to make the game. It's it's really good. I love my indie games. He really just should have stayed out of the Stop Killing initiative, the Stop Killing Games initiative. Really should have just stayed out of it. Really should not have padded his resume. If he just hadn't padded his resume, if he just hadn't like made himself out to be like a super game developer. If he just didn't do the appeal to authority, he would probably still be working on his game. But I think at this point, when you look at like I checked out for Steam, the recent reviews for Heartbound. Not good. Really not good. Those reviews are not good. So, you know what I mean? Like the recent reviews. It doesn't look like he's going to finish it anytime soon. I don't know. I don't even know if it's him actually working on it himself. But like I said, the reviews for the game, the recent reviews for the game are not good at all. So, this was my reaction to Developer Examines PirateSoftware Part 1 Job History and Development Hell. I hope, Slop News Network makes part 2. It'll be very interesting. This was G-Man Gaming and Reviews. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. If you'd like me to react to anything else, feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought about this video. Whether or not I should react to videos on the Stop Killing Games initiative. But this was G-Man Gaming and Reviews, signing off.